So what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you how I prepare chestnuts in two ways. And these are Chinese chestnuts that were collected here locally, and you can see they look pretty good. They've been in the refrigerator since we harvested them, and I'm gonna score them for roasting, and then I'm also gonna blanch and peel some to freeze them. So let me just show you the first thing I do for roasting them. I'm gonna just score them with a paring knife, and I've got a sharp. It's a sharp knife. Has a short blade. It's not really a chestnut knife. I should have procured a real chestnut knife. There is such a thing as a chestnut knife. The handle would be the same, but the blade would be about half the length of this. A little curving blade. So the way I score them, I'm going to choke up on the blade like this. I'm going to cut an X into the flat side of every nut. Now this is the step that some people think is really dangerous, because notice that I'm aiming towards my thumb there. I'm just going to be careful, and I'm going to do that one nut at a time. I'm cutting an X into the flat side, and I'm going rather deeply into the kernel. But I want to get a nice cut. Now some people like to cut across the top of the nut like that. I think that's harder to do and more dangerous. Let me show you again. I'll cut across the top of the nut. You know, that's harder. For me, it's easier to cut an X onto the flat side of the nut. And so I'm going deep into the kernel, and I'm cutting all the way across, and that's gonna make them easier to peel once they're roasted. Now what I'm doing here, I'm dropping them into boiling water. I'm actually just gonna simmer that water. They've been in the refrigerator for a month or so. I'm going to drop them into that boiling water for just a minute. It does a couple things. It helps them rehydrate maybe a little bit. I don't know. It also, because the kernel, I want the kernel cooked all the way through. When I roast them, I'm going to roast them on high heat. I want to make sure they get cooked all the way through, so this is going to bring them up to a high temperature. So they'll already be a little bit warm. They'll already be a little bit warm when we put them in the roaster. Also, if there's any bad ones, they'll float. Floating is a sign of not good. Maybe it's moldy. Maybe it had a weevil in there. The ones that sink are generally the good ones. So if I see any that float, I can just discard those. Okay, so those are just coming to a simmer. I'm not really going to boil them. I just wanted them to come to a simmer. I'm going to leave them in there for just another 1 minute maybe. And you can see that the peel is already starting to open up. Okay, now I'm going to roast them. There's two ways I roast chestnuts. And my favorite way is in this cast iron pot. It's a cast iron pot with a lid, heavy thing, and I'm going to just put that on high heat. I'm going to turn that on high, right on top of the stovetop, right on the fire. So I've got that on high. These have come to a simmer now. I'm going to turn those off. I'm going to drain those into a colander, a strainer. I kept my hot water because I want that hot water again. And I'm going to put those in there. And those are going to stay on high. I'm going to stir those every maybe 5 minutes or so, and I'm going to set the timer for 15 minutes. I'll stir those every 5 minutes or so, and they'll be roasted About 15 minutes it'll take those to cook. Now these other chestnuts, the recipe I'm going to do with these, I'm going to show you how I blanch them to peel them to freeze them. And there are a couple ways I like to do this. My favorite way is to use my Felco No. 2 pruner, which is the Swiss drop forged aluminum horticulture pruner. And I normally keep a pair in my kitchen drawer here, but I didn't see it, so this is actually the one from the garden. That's fine. It's perfectly clean. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to cut each nut in half. And I could do this beforehand. In other words, if I had another bowl here, we could cut all these in half. You know, if I had 10 pounds of nuts, I would process them first. I would just cut them all in half. But for the sake of this demo, I'm just going to do it one at a time like this and drop them right into the boiling water. And by cutting them in half, it's going to make it easier to peel later. But it also it affords me an opportunity to inspect each nut. So if I see any bad ones, you know, if I see a moldy one, or if I see a weevil or wormy one, I can just throw it away. So these all look pretty good. Haven't seen a bad one yet. I'm going to drop those in there. So these I'm just going to blanch. I'm going to bring these to a boil. They don't need to really cook. I just want them to boil for about 1 minute. As soon as they come to a boil, I'm going to strain them out and we'll peel them. And I'll show you how I peel them. It's almost time to stir those things. Remember, I'm going to roast these for about 15 minutes. Every 5 minutes or so, I'm going to give them a stir. Okay, so this is to a boil now. I just wanted to blanch those. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to pour them into there. Now the weird thing about this is they peel better. They peel better when they're hot. And so I'm going to dump them out here on the table. Meanwhile, these guys over here are now ready to be peeled. And really what I'm going to do, I'm just going to grab each nut and I'm going to pop it out of its shell. And if they're a good quality chestnut, notice that a lot of them just popped out of their shells while they were blanching in there. If they're not, if they're stuck, I'm just going to grab it like that and sort of squeeze it a little bit. You see that? I'm just squeezing it like that. And notice that in this particular chestnut, this is a Chinese chestnut, the pellicle, which is that inner skin, is coming off cleanly. I'm going to turn that down. The pellicle comes off cleanly. So I'm getting a nice clean kernel with every one. If they're stuck, I can give it a little pinch like that, and they'll come right off, hopefully. Not all chestnuts peel so well as these. I'm just using my pruner now to give it a little pinch there. Do you see? The ones that are stuck in their shell, I'm just kind of squeezing it. If I had a pliers, like a needle nose pliers or something, I could use that. So there's a batch of peeled kernels. Okay, let's stir the roasted chestnuts now. They need a few more minutes. You see how the skins are starting to pop open in there? They're kind of steaming in their own juice in there. One of the ways that I value the quality of the chestnut is the ease with which they peel. This is a good variety of chestnut, I think. This is a local Chinese because they peel so easily. And so a chestnut that peels easily is one that's, you know, it's easy to use in a recipe. You can make a chestnut soup. You can throw those in a stir fry. You can make a chestnut puree. Just put those in a chestnut dressing. So those guys are ready to use in any recipe that calls for chestnuts now. Let's check on the roasted chestnuts one more time. I've got about 3.5 minutes to go on my 15 minutes. I'm going to stir them up one more time. The skin is almost burned there. That's the way I want it. They're roasting, and you know, roasting is hot. Need the heat. Okay, these guys look done to me. They're starting to get burned. They've got about 12 seconds left. They're getting really black on that one side. So what I'm going to do now, I've got a ceramic bowl ready here. That's the timer. It's been 15 minutes. They're ready. I've got a nice bowl here to serve them in. I've got a linen napkin. I'm going to take the lid off here very carefully so I don't burn myself, because this thing is really hot now. I'm just going to dump those in there like that, and I'm going to wrap them up. I'm going to let those sort of steam in their own juice in there. And you know, had I done a little bit more, it would have filled the bowl a little more, but for this exercise that's plenty. And then that's what I'm going to serve to my guests. So if there's folks ready to eat, you know, I can come along and I can say, would you like a roasted chestnut? Now these are piping hot, but someone will take that out and peel it and then eat it. And they're cooked all the way through. They're browned on the outside, which means they're a little bit crunchy, but they're nice and soft on the inside. They're really hot, but they're a nice texture. And I always joke with people, especially, for instance, last night we were invited over to some friend's house for dinner. And I said, you know, I don't really know, but I think you're just supposed to throw the shells on the floor and someone will pick those up later.